Today, we dive into the most horrifying deaths ever recorded. From thrill seekers who push their bodies beyond fatal limits to competitive spirits whose determination turned innocent charity events into scenes of unimaginable tragedy. In the morning of September 17, 2022, in the eastern Rocky Mountains, the morning began cold and clear. Frost coated the shaded rock surfaces, and the air at 13,000 feet hovered a little above 40 degrees Fahrenheit. It was quiet, still, and bright, the kind of morning wingsuit pilots usually hope for. This was where 32-year-old Sarah Martinez stood preparing for what she believed would be a routine flight. Sarah lived in Colorado, and almost everything in her life revolved around the outdoors. She worked as an outdoor camera operator for small production teams, the kind of job that required long hours in rough places, cliff edges, snowfields, canyons, and ridgelines. She filmed climbers during multi-day expeditions, recorded skydivers testing out new gear, and captured footage for training videos used by backcountry groups. She liked the work because it blended her two favorite things: being outside and documenting moments most people never get to see. Outside of work, she had her own goals. She wanted to build a small production company that focused on filming remote adventure sports, especially technical climbing and flight footage. She talked about eventually traveling to South America to film flights over desert cliffs and volcanic ridges. Some of her friends said she dreamed bigger than she admitted. If things had gone as she planned, she would have slowly moved from being a camera operator to a full-time director for outdoor projects. Her path into wingsuit flying came naturally. She started with skydiving in her early 20s, first as a hobby and then as a passion. What she liked most wasn't the thrill people talked about, it was the control. She liked learning how to use her body like a tool, adjusting position by inches, staying calm even when free-falling at high speed. By the time she transitioned into wingsuit flying, she already had hundreds of safe skydives behind her. She approached every new step the same way she approached life: slowly, patiently, and with a notebook full of details. By the morning of her final flight, Sarah had logged more than 600 skydives and nearly 200 wingsuit runs. Her friends always described her the same way: steady, organized, and serious about preparation. She preferred technical lines with clean exits and predictable air, not risky stunts or showy maneuvers. She wasn't chasing viral videos or trying to impress anyone. She simply wanted to get better at the discipline she loved, one jump at a time. That September morning in the Rockies felt like any other step toward her long-term goals. She had a new camera setup she planned to test mid-flight, a clean route mapped out through the main valley, and a trusted partner jumping behind her. Everything pointed to a normal, controlled day in the air. She had no reason to believe it would be her last. Before the jump, Sarah and her partner spent several minutes going over the route again. They laid out their printed maps on a flat rock and traced the path with their gloves, making sure they both understood every turn. The first part of the flight was supposed to be the easiest, an open stretch of air running through the main valley where the wind usually stayed steady. The second part required more precision. They would have to make a slow, controlled curve around a large granite ridge that jutted out over the valley. If they misjudged the angle by even a little, they could drift too close to the rock face. The final part of the run involved lining up for a long glide toward a clearing near 6,000 feet, where they would deploy their parachutes and land in open space. Everything on paper looked solid. The weather forecast showed light winds between 5 and 10 miles per hour, clear visibility, and no major changes expected until late afternoon. For wingsuit flyers, those numbers were considered ideal. Still, the two of them reviewed the ranger station's weekly notes. The notes mentioned small bursts of turbulence inside certain side canyons, nothing extreme, just the kind of shifting air that can happen when morning sun warms the rock faster in some areas than others. It wasn't enough to cancel the flight, but it was something an experienced flyer keeps in mind. After gearing up, they walked to the cliff edge to test the conditions for themselves. Sarah crouched lower, watching how dust and grass moved near the drop-off. Her partner tossed a small piece of dry grass into the air to see how it drifted. Everything pointed downward in a smooth line. The airflow felt calm against their suits, and the valley seemed clear and predictable. But as the sun continued to rise, the landscape below them began to change in ways they couldn't see from the top. Sunlight hit some canyon walls sooner than others, warming the rock unevenly. Warmer air in one spot and colder air in another can create small horizontal pushes, crosswinds, that don't show up in general weather readings and can form suddenly. These pockets of shifting air were invisible from the launch point, and neither of them had any reason to suspect the flight would unfold differently than planned. After one last equipment check, Sarah stepped toward the edge, counted down with her partner, and launched at 9:42 a.m. The moment she dropped from the cliff, her wingsuit filled with air exactly the way it should. The suit stretched tight, the fabric locked into place, and her glide became steady within seconds. GPS logs later confirmed that her exit was almost perfect. No wobble, no delayed inflation, nothing hinting at early trouble. She held a smooth line along the left side of the main valley, following the plan they had gone over that morning. Her horizontal speed stayed consistent, and her body position didn't shift much. Behind her, about 80 yards back, her partner kept a close watch. You could see her outlined clearly against the open valley and radioed occasional updates, altitude, heading, and small adjustments they both needed to make to stay aligned with the intended route. To him, everything looked routine. The first major landmark, a tall granite pillar that stood like a vertical spike in the valley, came into view a few minutes later. Sarah passed it cleanly, keeping enough space between herself and the rock face to avoid turbulence. But once she crossed that point, the valley began to change shape. It narrowed slightly, the floor angled upward, and the side walls shifted closer together. These changes created different airflow pockets, especially as the morning sun started warming the canyon surfaces unevenly. This is where the wind shifted. Helmet footage later showed the moment it happened. A sudden crosswind struck from her left side. It wasn't a gentle push. It was a sharp blast created by warm air rising off one canyon wall and colder air dropping from a shaded section above. When those two air masses met, they formed a sideways gust strong enough to shove a wingsuit flyer off course in less than a second. Sarah's body jolted several feet to the right. Her partner saw it instantly. One moment she was centered in the main corridor. The next, she was sliding toward the canyon wall. He later said it looked like she had been bumped by invisible force, a movement far too fast to be a simple steering error. She reacted quickly, turning her shoulders and tightening the wings of her suit to recenter herself, and she barely cleared the nearest rock formation. But the correction happened at the worst possible moment. The push angled her into a side canyon, one they had intentionally avoided because it rose sharply and offered almost no margin for parachute deployment. From her partner's view, she disappeared as soon as she crossed the boundary into that side corridor. He said it felt like watching someone turn a corner too sharply in a hallway and never reappear. He called her name twice over the radio. She answered once, short, focused, and strained. Inside the alternate canyon, based on her footage, the terrain changed quickly. Instead of dropping away beneath her like the main valley, the canyon floor rose toward her. Her altimeter tones still beeped at normal intervals, but the ground was getting closer faster than expected. The walls on both sides narrowed, leaving little room to steer or adjust her path. Then came the second shift. A downdraft formed near the upper ridge of the canyon, cool air sliding downward like a heavy curtain. This kind of air movement doesn't give a flyer time to plan. It simply hits, and the wingsuit loses lift immediately. Her suit compressed slightly as the airflow pinned her downward. Her descent rate increased, and her margin for escape shrank to seconds. With the canyon tightening and no flat areas for a controlled landing, she deployed her parachute around 3,000 feet. Under normal conditions, this altitude is enough for the canopy to inflate, level out, and give the flyer space to maneuver. But the confined rock walls forced the parachute to open unevenly. Lines twisted, the canopy jerked to the right. The wind inside the canyon was too unstable for it to fully recover. She swung hard toward the right wall. Her partner heard her final transmission, a short sentence cut off mid-word. He waited for her parachute to appear in the main valley, but nothing came through the clearing. Her GPS tracker sent one last altitude reading, then stopped transmitting altogether. Her helmet footage captured only a few more frames, the canyon wall rushing upward, the image tilting sharply, and then the video ending in a single blurred motion. At 10:23 a.m., two hikers moving through the lower canyon heard a single sharp echo roll through the ridge above them. It didn't sound like a rock slide or regular wind shift. It was shorter, heavier, and seemed to hit the canyon walls before fading out. They stopped, listened again, and when nothing followed, one of them pulled out a satellite device. The two gave the nearest known coordinates and reported that the sound could have come from higher up the west fork of the canyon. Because normal cell service didn't reach that area, this call was the only way authorities even knew something had happened. The county search and rescue team was dispatched within minutes. A helicopter crew tried lifting off first, but as soon as the pilot checked the canyon approach, he reported unstable airflow. gusts coming off the walls, unpredictable pockets of wind, and a narrow entry line. Even a small airshift inside the canyon could flip a helicopter tail first into the rock. With no safe way to enter from above, ground teams were ordered in on foot. The rescue crew began their climb from the base of the canyon. The lower section was manageable, but the farther they went, the steeper and looser the terrain became. They moved across unstable scree, stepped over angled slabs of rock, and used ropes to cross areas where one slip would send someone sliding 20 or 30 feet. It took more than an hour to climb into the branching corridor where Sarah's GPS signal had last transmitted. As they moved deeper, debris from her descent became more noticeable. Torn fabric, a broken riser strap, and small pieces of gear scattered on the rocks. These were signs they were close. At around 1 p.m., the first team reached a boulder field along the West Canyon wall. Her partner, who had guided them via radio from a higher viewpoint, confirmed it matched the area where he had last seen her silhouette disappear. They found Sarah near the upper edge of the boulder field. Her parachute was fully deployed but tangled across several rocks, the canopy twisted from an uneven inflation. Her wingsuit was heavily damaged on the front and right side, consistent with a high-speed impact. There were no signs of equipment malfunction prior to the crash, no tears that suggested a mid-air failure, no broken seams that would point to fabrication issues. The scene showed one thing clearly. She made contact with the ground at full speed. A medical specialist on the team performed standard checks, but confirmed she had died on impact. Given the terrain and the afternoon winds, extraction by helicopter was still unsafe. The rescue crew secured the area, documented the scene for investigators, and stayed on site, waiting for wind conditions to settle. It took several more hours before a helicopter could safely hover above a wider clearing farther down the canyon and lift her out. In the days that followed, investigators reviewed everything. Helmet footage recovered from her camera, GPS logs showing her flight path, weather readings from nearby stations, and wind reports taken before and after the incident. Authorities concluded that 3 factors combined to cause the crash: the sudden crosswind that pushed her off the main route, the rising terrain inside the side canyon that left little space for recovery, and the downdraft that forced her to deploy a parachute in a corridor too tight for stabilization. Their final report listed the cause of death as blunt force trauma from a high-speed impact with the canyon floor. Sarah's final moments became a reminder of how fast conditions in mountain air can turn, and how even skilled wingsuit pilots can be put in a situation with no way out. After the incident, authorities shut down the launch site for several weeks so experts could study the terrain and the air patterns that moved through the valley. Specialists in mountain meteorology, local rangers, and wingsuit instructors reviewed wind readings, compared them with Sarah's GPS logs, and ran small test flights using drones. Their goal wasn't to blame her, it was to understand exactly what kind of airflow could push an experienced pilot off a planned line so suddenly. What they found confirmed a long-standing concern among seasoned flyers. In mountain terrain, wind doesn't always move in smooth lines the way forecasts suggest. It bounces off walls, curls around ridges, drops into canyons, and rises in pockets of warm air. One gust can be gentle in one part of the corridor and violent just a few feet away. In Sarah's case, the crosswind struck at the exact point where 2 air masses collided, creating a sideways push strong enough to pull her off the main route. The narrow canyon she entered left no room for recovery. Within the wingsuit community, Sarah's case quickly became a reference point. Instructors pulled her flight data, her altimeter tones, and the helmet footage into training sessions for new flyers. They used her experience to show how fast a routine glide could turn dangerous, even when a pilot is doing everything right. Her story was brought up in safety briefings to emphasize that the hazards of proximity flying don't always come from dramatic mistakes or reckless behavior. Sometimes, the danger comes from things pilots can't see, air currents hidden inside the terrain. Sarah's accident also changed how many wingsuit schools taught their advanced courses. Before her crash, narrow corridors were seen as difficult but achievable lines, routes that demanded precision but could be flown safely if a pilot practiced enough. Instructors often focused on the visible risks: sharp rock walls, sudden turns, and steep terrain. These were things a flyer could see and plan for. After Sarah's incident, the tone shifted. Schools began pointing out that the real dangers in tight mountain corridors aren't always physical obstacles. They're the invisible forces moving through the air. Coaches started spending more time explaining how crosswinds can slip between ridges without showing up on standard forecasts, how downdrafts can appear when cool air spills over a saddle in the ridge, and how upward-sloping canyon floors silently eat away at a flyer's altitude. Even a slight rise in terrain can shrink the margin for error from seconds to nothing. Students were encouraged to study the terrain the same way climbers study avalanche paths, slowly, carefully, and with respect. They were taught to picture how wind might bend around a corner, how morning sunlight can warm one side of a canyon faster than the other, and how warm air rising from the valley can collide with cold air descending from a ridge. These small shifts create invisible turbulence that no camera or GPS can see. Some schools even added new rules: avoid narrow canyons during early morning temperature changes, reject any route with an upward slope unless conditions are completely stable, and never trust a corridor simply because another pilot made it through the week before. Instructors stressed that mountain air behaves like moving water, always shifting, always unpredictable, never the same twice. In the months after Sarah's crash, pilots across the community began referencing her final flight in discussions and debriefs. People who had watched her footage or studied her GPS data pointed out how clean her launch was, how steady her glide appeared, and how quickly it all changed. Her case became a reminder that wingsuit flying isn't just about being skilled or careful. It's about understanding that conditions can break down faster than human reaction time. Her story made one thing clear: even when a pilot does everything right, the mountain and the air above it don't always cooperate. And in a sport where the margin for correction is only a few feet, a single unexpected gust can turn a perfect flight into something no one can recover from. Her final flight made one point very clear to the entire community. Mastery means understanding the limits of human control. And in mountain winds, even the best pilots don't get unlimited chances. It was March 7, 2018, in a 12-story office tower in downtown St. Louis, where late-evening maintenance work was being conducted during a scheduled power system test. The building's emergency lighting cast dim shadows through the corridors, and most tenants had left hours earlier. Two emergency stairwells provided the primary evacuation routes, with Stairwell A typically remaining unlocked during maintenance operations, while Stairwell B was under a temporary security override. Selma Jory, a 51-year-old facilities supervisor, was conducting her final inspection of the day before the building's weekend closure. She was a veteran employee nearing retirement, known for her thorough approach to safety protocols and her dedication to maintaining building standards. Her colleagues described her as meticulous and professional. Mark Ellison, a 45-year-old maintenance contractor, had been working in the building for several years and was familiar with the emergency door systems. The magnetic door locks could be controlled remotely from the main security panel. 2 weeks earlier, Jory had hired Ellison for kitchen renovation work through his side handyman business. The results were substandard: crooked cabinets, faulty electrical work, and water damage. When Ellison refused refunds or repairs, Jory posted scathing reviews on Yelp, Google, and Facebook with photos of the shoddy work. Other customers came forward with similar complaints, and Ellison's side business collapsed overnight. Text messages from his phone showed growing anger, including threats to teach her a lesson. That evening, Jory was wearing a body-mounted safety camera, as required by building policy during solo inspections. An unrelated electrical fault within the building's ventilation control system had begun generating smoke that migrated upward through the stairwell shafts, though this was not immediately apparent. As Jory entered Stairwell B to inspect the emergency lighting, Ellison activated the magnetic door override from the security panel. Because the building was undergoing a scheduled power system test, standard fire release interlocks for Stairwell B were temporarily offline, leaving the magnetic lock engaged despite the smoke. He later admitted to investigators that he intended to trap her temporarily as payback for the online reviews, believing she would eventually be found when security made their rounds. The electrical fault suddenly worsened, filling Stairwell B with thick smoke. Jory attempted to force the sealed door, but could not overcome the magnetic locking mechanism. The body camera recorded her increasingly desperate attempts to escape as smoke continued to accumulate. The concrete stairwell acted as a chimney, concentrating the smoke and reducing visibility to near zero. Jory lost her footing on the steps and fell down multiple concrete risers, striking her head and back against the hard surfaces. The body camera continued recording until the battery failed. Building security discovered the electrical fault during a routine sweep and initiated emergency ventilation procedures. Jory was found unconscious in stairwell B when responders forced the door open. She was pronounced dead at the scene from a combination of smoke inhalation and traumatic injuries sustained during the fall. Security system logs showed that the magnetic door lock had been activated from the main panel during the time frame when Jory was conducting her inspection. Ellison initially denied involvement, but later admitted to sealing the door, claiming he was unaware of the electrical fault and insisting he only meant to scare her. Investigators determined that while Ellison could not have anticipated the electrical malfunction, his deliberate action of confining Jory in the stairwell as retaliation for a personal grievance directly contributed to her death. Mark Ellison was charged with first-degree involuntary manslaughter. After a 3-week trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to 12 years in state prison. During sentencing, the judge noted that Ellison's vindictiveness over negative online reviews had cost Selma Jory her life and devastated her family. Ellison showed minimal remorse during the proceedings, maintaining that he never intended for anyone to get hurt. The Jory family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against both Ellison and the building management company that settled for an undisclosed sum before trial. It was March 15, 2016, when the crystal-clear waters of Belize's Blue Hole would claim the life of one of San Diego's most experienced technical diving instructors. Dorian Lane, a 34-year-old with over 800 log dives and 12 years of underwater experience, had built a reputation as both a skilled instructor and a dangerous risk-taker among his peers. His aggressive personality and tendency to push diving limits had earned him the nickname Cowboy Diver, a label that would prove prophetic on this fateful day. Lane had arrived in Belize, leading a small 2-person technical team on a deep trimix dive, planned to reach 330 to 350 feet. The weather conditions were marginal, with 15-knot winds creating 4-foot swells, causing concern among the boat crew. Despite briefing reminders about exertion and CO2 buildup risks at deep depth, Lane insisted the dive would be routine and downplayed concerns from the crew. His dive plan called for 8 minutes of bottom time at 420 feet, requiring a complex 90-minute decompression schedule. Lane's trimix gas mixture contained 10% oxygen, 70% helium, and 20% nitrogen, appropriate for the planned depth. However, warning signs appeared during pre-dive preparations when his primary second stage began to intermittently free flow, a serious gas-wasting issue Lane ignored in his rush to descend. The dive team noticed Lane seemed unusually distracted and hurried during equipment checks, skipping his normally methodical safety routine. His dive buddy expressed serious concerns about the aggressive dive profile, but Lane insisted on proceeding as planned, demonstrating the overconfidence that would soon prove fatal. At 350 feet, increased breathing resistance and exertion from poor trim and descent control caused him to work harder than planned. This increased exertion caused dangerous carbon dioxide buildup in his system, leading to impaired judgment and confusion. His dive computer began alarming at 380 feet as he exceeded safe descent rates, but the CO2 narcosis prevented him from processing these critical warnings effectively. Upon reaching 420 feet, severe carbon dioxide retention caused Lane to become completely disoriented and lose buoyancy control. He began an uncontrolled ascent just as his free-flowing primary drained the last of his usable gas, leaving him desperately short on breathing gas and unable to access enough reserve air during the emergency ascent. Lane's dive buddy attempted rescue procedures, but found him unresponsive and ascending rapidly with his regulator out of his mouth. The emergency ascent became impossible to control as Lane, now severely CO2 narked and overbuoyant, lost the ability to dump gas fast enough enough from his BCD, sending him rocketing toward the surface at a deadly rate. At 200 feet during the rapid ascent, Lane's lungs overexpanded, forcing gas into his bloodstream and causing an arterial gas embolism that instantly shut down blood flow to his heart and brain. Frothy, blood-tinged fluid appeared in his airway from severe pulmonary barotrauma as expanding gas tore through his lung tissue. The gas embolism blocked critical blood flow to his heart and brain, causing immediate cardiac arrest at 100 feet depth. Surface recovery efforts found Lane's body showing severe signs of pulmonary barotrauma with no vital signs. Coast Guard medical examination confirmed the cause of death as arterial gas embolism resulting from an uncontrolled ascent from extreme depth. The investigation revealed that Lane's carbon dioxide retention was caused by overexertion and poor breathing technique at depth, compounded by his equipment failures and rushed preparation. The dive operation was immediately suspended for 6 months, while safety protocols underwent a complete overhaul. Lane's death led to new industry standards requiring mandatory gas analysis verification and comprehensive CO2 monitoring training for all technical divers. His family's wrongful death lawsuit resulted in a $2.3 million settlement and the permanent closure of the dive operation. On February 2, 2017, the Alpine Winter Challenge held its men's downhill training session at the Kaltberg Ski Arena in western Austria. The venue was built along a wide mountainside, with steep wooded areas lining the lower half of the run. The racecourse stretched for more than a mile and included several fast straightaways that dropped sharply into narrow sections bordered by trees. Temperatures stayed around 29 degrees Fahrenheit, with hard, icy snow left over from the week's artificial grooming. The Kaltberg course had been rebuilt that winter because of unusually low snowfall. Large sections of the hill were patched with machine-made snow that sat on top of frozen dirt. The organizers had transported truckloads of snow from neighboring valleys, but the coverage remained thin. Course workers placed sandbags around some trees, though many spots had no padding at all. Among the athletes entered that week was Aaron Whitlock, a 19-year-old downhill skier from New Zealand. His team was small, made up of only 3 racers and 1 coach. Aaron had grown up training on narrow South Island slopes, and while he wasn't a well-known name, he had earned a place on the winter circuit after a strong showing in regional competitions the year before. His coaches liked his calm technique and his ability to hold a line on difficult ice. The Kaltberg track was new to Aaron. He had arrived only 2 days earlier and completed a slow inspection run. Although he usually preferred long, smooth courses, he accepted that this hill required quick reactions and precise steering. Several older racers had privately said the course felt overloaded with athletes during practice, since all 112 competitors were released for training at the same time. The training run began just before 10 a.m. A light wind pushed snow dust across the upper section. Spectators gathered along the fence near the finish zone, and volunteers stationed themselves around key turns with radios. Coaches stood on the sidelines shouting timing splits as skiers passed each interval. Aaron started his run at 11:12 a.m. He pushed out of the start gate and moved into a low tuck position. Early observers noticed he held a clean line through the first sector, passing the first timing zone near the middle of the field. As he approached the ridge drop, a steep pitch known for rapid acceleration, skiers below waited for their own turn to start. A few racers had slowed to talk with their teammates near the edge of the course. The middle section of the run opened into a straight stretch. A group of athletes, after completing their runs, had stopped near the outside of the straightaway while waiting for course workers to reset a fallen gate. Radio calls later confirmed that race control had not ordered them to move away from the line. Aaron entered the straight at an estimated speed of 40 to 45 miles per hour. Spectators standing along a nearby overlook reported that he appeared steady until he passed a small roller where his skis bounced slightly. As he regained contact with the snow, he saw the stopped group of racers only seconds ahead. According to witnesses, the athletes were positioned too close to the racing line. Aaron shifted his weight left to avoid them. The quick adjustment caused his left ski to catch a raised patch where the artificial snow met the ice. The ski edge locked, sending him off balance. He tried to compensate, but the force of the turn pulled him outward toward the tree line. People near the barrier later said they heard the scrape of his skis as he fought to stay upright. He traveled only a few yards before losing full control. His skis crossed and he slid off the course at high speed, striking a tree trunk just past the edge of the run. The area went quiet for a moment before coaches started waving for help. Volunteers radioed course control, and the next racer waiting at the start gate was held back. A group of staff members reached Erin quickly. They positioned a tarp around the crash site while medical personnel arrived from the finish zone on a tracked rescue sled. Just after noon, the organizers announced that the training session was canceled for the day. Later that afternoon, event officials released a short statement confirming that Aaron Whitlock had died from the injuries he suffered when he struck the tree line at high speed. Medical staff reported that the impact caused multiple blunt force traumas, including severe chest compression, rib fractures, and damage to major blood vessels, along with a catastrophic head injury from the initial collision. These combined injuries were described as unsurvivable on scene, with no practical way to stabilize him on the course. In response, course workers added extra padding to the lower section and adjusted the athlete flow for the remaining training days. It was April 8, 2017, when 26-year-old Adelaide Quinn stood beneath the towering oak that would become her final challenge. The spirited outdoor education instructor had spent her career teaching children rock climbing at a local adventure camp in Asheville, North Carolina. Her fearless nature and infectious enthusiasm had made her beloved in the climbing community, but those same qualities would ultimately lead to her downfall. Adelaide discovered the massive oak during weekend explorations through the public park. Standing at 110 feet, the ancient tree represented everything she loved about vertical challenges. Her competitive background in collegiate rock climbing had instilled a deep need to push boundaries, and establishing a local height record seemed like the perfect showcase for her skills. Her sister Maya shared Adelaide's passion for the outdoors, but approached risks with more caution. The 30-year-old elementary school teacher possessed an organized mind that made her invaluable for coordinating the record attempt. Park Ranger Victor Ramos, a 36-year-old former military man, brought a methodical approach to safety and gradually approved Adelaide's climbing attempt as the park allowed technical tree ascents when reviewed and cleared by trained staff. Adelaide spent weeks analyzing the tree's structure, identifying load-bearing branches, and mapping her route. Victor conducted thorough inspections of her equipment. During practice sessions, Adelaide noticed a concerning detail at approximately 105 feet, where her chosen anchor branch had produced an audible crack under partial loading. The branch appeared to hold, leading both Adelaide and Victor to conclude it remained structurally sound. On the morning of the record attempt, Adelaide moved with confidence while Maya documented every step, and Victor positioned foam mats beneath the climbing zone. A small crowd gathered to witness what they hoped would be a historic achievement. Adelaide's ascent began flawlessly, showcasing her technical expertise. She utilized foot ascenders and belay assistance, using a standard single rope system appropriate for high tree climbs. At 85 feet, Adelaide paused to appreciate the spectacular view of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Maya captured the moment on camera, unaware that it would be one of the last images of her sister alive. The final phase proceeded according to plan until Adelaide approached the 100-foot mark. The anchor branch, already compromised by previous loading cycles, began showing additional signs of stress. Victor noticed the developing situation and called for Adelaide to halt her ascent, but the warning came too late. The catastrophic failure occurred without warning. The anchor limb fractured completely at its connection point with the main trunk, instantly eliminating all support for Adelaide's top rope system. The sudden loss of protection left her in an uncontrolled fall through the tree's dense canopy. During her terrifying plummet, Adelaide's body collided with multiple branches at various heights. The impacts at multiple mid-canopy levels caused devastating trauma to her torso and extremities, including multiple fractures and severe internal injuries. The foam mats provided minimal protection against the tremendous forces generated by her high-altitude fall. Adelaide struck the ground with an impact that immediately silenced the gathered spectators. Victor rushed to her side and began CPR procedures, while Maya frantically called for emergency medical assistance. The responding paramedics quickly assessed her injuries, finding evidence of massive internal trauma. Despite aggressive resuscitation efforts, Adelaide's injuries proved incompatible with survival. The combination of multiple blunt force trauma, internal hemorrhaging, and suspected aortic damage had caused irreversible harm to her vital organs. She was pronounced dead at the scene, her dreams of inspiring others through adventure ending in tragedy. The investigation revealed that while the anchor branch had shown subtle warning signs, these indicators were insufficient to predict the catastrophic failure. The incident prompted immediate policy changes, requiring professional arborist assessments for all future tree climbing activities. Maya honored her sister's memory by donating Adelaide's climbing equipment to local outdoor education programs. A memorial plaque was installed at the base of the oak tree. It was August 22, 2017, when the ancient limestone caves of Mexico's Dos Ojos cenote would become a tomb for a promising marine biology researcher. Iris Thompson, a 28-year-old scientist from Boston, had dedicated her career to understanding underwater ecosystems. With 450 logged cave dives and advanced certifications, Thompson was known for her meticulous approach to safety and methodical research techniques. However, she harbored a secret fear, mild claustrophobia that she managed through controlled breathing exercises, a vulnerability that would prove crucial in her final moments. Thompson had traveled to Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula to collect water samples from unexplored cenote passages for her groundbreaking research on ecosystem adaptation. Her mission required penetrating 800 feet horizontally into the Dos Ojos cave system at 60 feet depth, carrying specialized collection containers and scientific equipment. Recent heavy rainfall had dramatically altered conditions within the cenote. Water levels had risen 6 feet, creating stronger currents and destabilizing limestone formations through increased water percolation. The normally crystal clear visibility of over 100 feet had been reduced to a murky 15 feet due to sediment stirred up by the storms. Local dive guides had issued warnings about unstable rock formations, reporting recent minor collapses caused by water erosion throughout the cave system. Despite these concerning conditions, Thompson pressed forward with her research timeline. Her equipment included twin steel tanks, pressurized to 3,200 psi, multiple dive lights, and her precious scientific sampling gear. During pre-dive preparations, her primary light began flickering intermittently, indicating potential battery failure. Thompson entered the flooded cave and began her methodical journey toward the research site. At 400 feet penetration, her primary light failed completely. This critical equipment failure violated the fundamental 3 lights rule of cave diving, but Thompson made a fatal decision to continue using only her backup lighting rather than abort the dive. Driven by scientific ambition, she pressed beyond her planned turnaround point despite the reduced visibility, also violating the rule of thirds for gas management. The cave seemed to close in around her as she swam deeper into the limestone labyrinth, her claustrophobia beginning to surface as the walls narrowed. At 750 feet penetration, the weakened cave structure finally gave way. A large section of weakened ceiling rock, loosened by weeks of percolation and storm runoff, suddenly broke free from above. The falling rock struck Thompson's lower body, pinning her legs against the cave floor and trapping her in place. The impact shattered 3 vertebrae in her lower back and ruptured her buoyancy compensator, causing immediate loss of buoyancy control. The falling debris also severed Thompson's air supply when it damaged her regulator's first stage, creating a catastrophic air leak that rapidly depleted her remaining gas. Trapped beneath the limestone slab with her legs immobilized, Thompson desperately attempted to reach her backup regulator, but her crushed spine prevented her from bending forward. The impact blasted silt into the water, reducing visibility to inches and making navigation impossible even if she had been able to free herself. Thompson's emergency air supply, compromised by the damaged regulator, lasted only 4 agonizing minutes. During this time, she made frantic attempts to lift the enormous rock, but her position and injuries made escape impossible. As her air supply dwindled to nothing, Thompson's claustrophobia overwhelmed her remaining composure. She died from drowning and crush injuries, her body remaining pinned 750 feet inside the flooded cave system. Recovery operations required specialized cave rescue teams equipped with pneumatic lifting equipment. It took 18 hours of dangerous work to reach Thompson's body and free it from the limestone trap. Dos Ojos Sin Norte was permanently closed to diving after engineers determined the entire cave system had become structurally compromised. Thompson's death prompted new regulations requiring geological stability assessments before issuing cave diving permits. On June 18, 2016, the Riverbend Theater in Mesa, Arizona, held its summer action show inside a medium-sized performance hall. The building seated a little over 1,800 people, with steep rows of chairs rising above a stage built from reinforced wood panels. The theater was known for weekend stunt programs that mixed martial arts, wire work, and light acrobatics. It wasn't a large company, but local families often went there for inexpensive entertainment. The cast for that summer included a small group of aerial performers who used harnesses and cable rigs to move across sections of the set. Temperatures outside reached 104 degrees Fahrenheit that afternoon, and even with strong air conditioning, the theater felt warm. According to staff members, the rigging system had been checked earlier that morning, and no issues were recorded. One of the performers was Daniel Ortiz, a 29-year-old part-time acrobat who also worked at a local hardware store. He had grown up practicing basic gymnastics at community centers and later joined small stunt groups that performed at county fairs and festivals. Daniel wasn't widely known, but people in the group described him as reliable with routine wirework jobs. He had been with the Riverbend show for 3 seasons and mainly handled mid-height aerial scenes that involved horizontal movement rather than high vertical lifts. That evening, the show began at 7 p.m. The crowd was large and most seats were filled. For the final act, the set rotated to reveal a vertical wall structure about 30 feet tall. The performers were supposed to run along the wall using their harnesses, then cross paths in a choreographed pattern. The cables were anchored to a metal frame above the stage, with a winch operator controlling their movement from the side platform. Daniel's task in this sequence was simple. He would be lifted about 24 feet from the stage floor, run diagonally across the vertical wall, and swing outward during a planned jump moment. He had practiced it many times. According to 2 stagehands, he completed the routine without issues during every rehearsal that week. At about 7:46 p.m., the final act began. People in the front rows brought out their phones, and the music track played at moderate volume. Daniel was lifted into position along with 2 other performers. Witnesses later said everything looked normal. The cables were steady, and the performers were aligned along their starting marks. When the cue light flashed, Daniel stepped forward and began his run. The audience watched him move across the wall at an angle, following the routine. About halfway through, he pushed off into the planned outward swing. At that moment, several people in the middle rows reported seeing his harness shift slightly to the right side. There was no loud snap, but multiple witnesses said they heard a short metallic sound, like a buckle catching. Almost immediately, Daniel's cable went slack. His harness slid upward along his torso, and then he dropped. According to later statements, he fell nearly straight down, hitting the lower frame section before landing on the stage floor. The distance was estimated at about 22 to 24 feet. The theater went silent for a few seconds, followed by scattered shouts from different sections of the audience. One of the other performers signaled toward the side platform, and the crew cut the music. The 2 remaining aerial performers were lowered onto the stage, while staff rushed toward Daniel. The stage manager stepped forward and asked the audience to stay seated while the curtain was slowly brought down. Several people in the first rows later said that Daniel did not show any sign of movement after the fall. A prop handler placed marking tape around the area to keep space clear until emergency staff reached the stage. The show ended immediately, and the audience was guided out through the rear exit doors. Many people walked quietly toward the parking lot, and a few mentioned to each other that they had believed the fall was part of the scene until they saw the crew waving for help. The investigation reveals that the harness and cable system was used for the act. Inspectors examined the platform where Daniel landed, the metal frame he struck on the way down, and the spacing of the rigging points above the stage. According to the report released later that evening, Daniel died from multiple blunt force injuries sustained during the fall, including trauma to the head, chest, and abdomen. The impact with the lower frame section caused the most severe injuries, and investigators noted that the height of the fall estimated at 22 to 24 feet, left little chance of survival once the harness gave way. The company suspended all aerial acts for the remainder of the season, and investigators collected the rigging equipment for inspection. Technicians removed the cables, harness components, and connection hardware to analyze them off-site. The Riverbend Theater took additional steps as well. The entire wall structure used for the final act was dismantled before the next set of shows, and management released a short notice stating that the closing number would be redesigned without any wire-assisted stunts. It was January 19, 2019, when the unforgiving peaks of Taiwan's Yushan National Park would claim the life of one of Taiwan's most recognizable hiking figures on social media. The towering summits, reaching nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, stood shrouded in winter's harsh embrace, their jagged ridges cutting through clouds that promised nothing but trouble for anyone brave enough to venture into their domain. The morning air hung thick with moisture, temperatures hovering just above freezing at lower elevations, but plummeting well below zero at the higher reaches where Gigi Wu planned to trek. At 36 years old, Wu had built a reputation that straddled two worlds: the serious mountaineering community that respected her technical skills, and the social media sphere that knew her as the Bikini hiker. Her Facebook following of 18,000 fans had grown accustomed to seeing her trademark photos, Wu posing in colorful bikinis atop Taiwan's most challenging peaks, always with proper climbing gear visible in the frame. Wu had previously worked as a photo model before dedicating most of her time to hiking and high-altitude trekking, her passion for the mountains evident in every post she shared. She possessed an infectious enthusiasm for Taiwan's natural beauty, often describing the spiritual connection she felt when standing above the clouds. Her personality combined genuine warmth with an adventurous spirit that sometimes pushed boundaries others might consider reckless. She had conquered over 100 peaks in just 4 years, each summit marked by her signature bikini photo, a tradition that began as a lost bet with a friend but evolved into her calling card. Born in 1982 in Taipei, Wu grew up in a modest family that nurtured her adventurous nature from a young age. After her father passed away in 2014, she made a significant life decision, quitting her modeling job and turning to hiking as a way to cope with her grief. The mountains became her sanctuary, a place where she could process loss while challenging herself physically and mentally. Her transformation from a shy girl who had always hidden behind glasses to a confident woman embracing both her beauty and bravery became part of her compelling story. The weather forecast for Yushan National Park that weekend painted a concerning picture. Weather forecasts and park advisories warned of rapidly changing mountain conditions, with visibility dropping to near zero in some areas and wind speeds reaching dangerous levels. Despite these warnings, Wu had committed to a solo multi-day trek through some of the park's most challenging terrain. She carried a satellite communication device, cold weather gear, and supplies intended for several days on the trail. Her last social media post, uploaded on January 18th, showed a breathtaking view from above the cloud line. The image captured the ethereal beauty that drew Wu to these heights time and again, rolling white clouds stretching endlessly below, with only the highest peaks piercing through like islands in a cotton sea. What the photo didn't reveal was the deteriorating weather system moving in from the west, bringing with it the conditions that would soon turn her adventure into a fight for survival. Wu had chosen a route that passed through particularly remote sections of the national park. The trail wound through dense forest before climbing steeply toward the alpine zone, where exposed ridges and deep ravines created a landscape both beautiful and treacherous. She had hiked this area before, but never alone in winter conditions. The path she selected required crossing several areas where the trail narrowed to just a few feet wide with steep drops on either side. Just weeks earlier, on December 24th, Wu had experienced a close call that underscored the risks of solo travel in steep terrain. She had posted photos of her legs badly bruised and battered, explaining in the comments how she had slipped from the path and easily could have fallen much further. The incident had left visible marks on her body, evidence of how quickly the mountains could turn dangerous, even for someone with her experience. Yet the near miss seemed to have done little to dampen her enthusiasm for solo adventures in challenging terrain. Wu's ambitious goal extended far beyond the 100 peaks she had already conquered. She aspired to climb all 268 mountains in Taiwan's central mountain range that stood over 9,800 feet high, a monumental undertaking that would have marked an ambitious personal goal within Taiwan's high mountain hiking community. Her dedication to this quest often put strain on her family relationships, particularly with her mother, who worried constantly about her daughter's increasingly dangerous solo expeditions. On the morning of January 19th, Wu was making her way along one of these exposed sections when disaster struck. The exact sequence of events remains unclear, as no witnesses were present to observe what happened. Investigators later concluded that Wu likely lost her footing on a section of trail made treacherous by overnight frost and morning moisture. The combination of slick rock and loose gravel created conditions that even an experienced hiker could find challenging. The fall sent Wu tumbling dozens of feet down a steep ravine, her body striking rocks and vegetation as she descended. The impact left her with injuries severe enough to prevent her from climbing back up the rocky slope. Trapped at the bottom of the ravine, Wu found herself in a nightmare scenario, injured, alone, and with weather conditions rapidly deteriorating around her. Despite her injuries, Wu managed to retrieve her satellite phone and place an emergency call to rescue services. The call came through to the Nantou County Fire Department, where dispatchers immediately began coordinating a rescue operation. Wu was able to provide limited location information and describe her injuries, though the extent of her injuries made communication difficult. The rescue team could hear the strain in her voice as she explained that she couldn't move and needed immediate assistance. Her friend Alex Yang, who had planned to pick her up on January 24th, received a frantic call from Wu around 4:30 in the afternoon. The conversation lasted only about 30 seconds, but Yang immediately sensed something was terribly wrong. Wu's voice carried an urgency he had never heard before, as she explained that she had fallen off a cliff and could no longer move her legs. Yang knew the temperatures in the mountains could drop to freezing at night and advised her to keep warm before the call abruptly ended. The first rescue helicopter launched within hours of receiving Wu's distress call. However, as the aircraft approached the mountainous terrain, pilots encountered weather conditions that made landing impossible. Thick clouds had settled over the peaks, reducing visibility to just a few yards. Strong winds created dangerous downdrafts and turbulence that threatened to slam the helicopter into the rocky slopes. After circling the area for nearly an hour, the pilot was forced to return to base without making contact with Wu. A second helicopter attempt was launched later that afternoon, equipped with more advanced navigation equipment and a crew experienced in mountain rescues. This team managed to get closer to Wu's location, but the combination of high winds and poor visibility again prevented them from reaching her. Radio contact was established briefly, confirming that Wu was still alive but growing weaker. The rescue team could hear the exhaustion in her voice as prolonged cold exposure and exhaustion took an increasing toll. As darkness fell on January 19th, temperatures in the ravine fell well below freezing overnight. Wu, dressed for hiking rather than surviving a night exposed to the elements, faced a battle against time in the mountain's merciless cold. Her body heat began to dissipate rapidly in the frigid air, while the rocky walls of the ravine provided no shelter from the wind that howled through the peaks above. The third and final helicopter rescue attempt came early on January 20th, as soon as weather conditions showed the slightest improvement. However, the overnight storm had worsened visibility even further, and dangerous ice conditions on the aircraft forced this mission to be aborted as well. With aerial rescue proving impossible, the Nantou County Fire Department made the difficult decision to send a ground team on foot. The ground rescue operation involved members of the Kali Buan tribe, indigenous people from the Bunan tribe, known for their expertise in high-altitude terrain. These experienced mountain guides often assisted in search and rescue operations, their intimate knowledge of the landscape proving invaluable in conditions where modern technology failed. Among them was 52-year-old Buak Slum Man, a tribal member who had previously encountered Wu during her climbing expeditions. The rescue team faced a grueling hike through treacherous terrain to reach Wu's location. Moving carefully through the same conditions that had claimed their target, the rescuers had to navigate icy trails, unstable rock formations, and areas where the path had been obscured by overnight snowfall. each team member carried approximately 45 pounds of equipment, including food, tents, clothing, ropes, and a portable stretcher. The journey that would normally take a few hours stretched into an all-day expedition as the team prioritized safety over speed. When the rescue team finally reached the ravine where Wu had fallen, they found her body at the bottom of the rocky slope. The 36-year-old mountaineer had succumbed to hypothermia during the night, her body unable to maintain core temperature in the sub-freezing conditions. Saklu Man, one of the tribal rescuers, discovered her lying on her back with her eyes closed and blood around her mouth. There was no sign of breathing or pulse, and her skin felt cold to the touch. The scene told the story of her final hours. Evidence showed she had attempted to create some shelter using an aluminum sleeping mat that covered most of her body, but her coat lay beside her, possibly displaced during attempts to adjust her position or conserve heat that often accompanies the final stages of hypothermia. Scattered around her were scraps of food and drink, indicating she had tried to maintain her strength during the long, cold night. Lin Cheng-yi from the Nantou County Fire and Rescue Services later explained to reporters that the weather conditions had made any rescue attempt extremely dangerous. The decision to send ground teams rather than continue helicopter operations had been made to prevent additional casualties, though everyone involved knew that time was working against them. The veteran firefighter expressed his wish that they could have reached Wu sooner, while acknowledging that going against the force of nature might have resulted in additional casualties. The recovery of Wu's body required additional logistical planning, as the same weather conditions that had prevented her rescue continued to hamper operations. Rescue teams had to move her body to a more accessible location where a helicopter could safely land once conditions improved. Before helicopters could reach the site, rescuers needed to clear surrounding vegetation to create a safe landing zone. On the morning of January 23rd, a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter finally managed to reach Wu's location, hovering high above the slope for an extended period, while crews battled strong mountain winds. The pilots struggled to keep the aircraft steady against strong mountain winds as the recovery team carefully lifted her body onto a metal stretcher. The dangerous operation required precise coordination between the flight crew and ground personnel to avoid adding to the tragedy. The official cause of death was determined to be hypothermia, brought on by prolonged exposure to freezing temperatures following her fall. The injuries sustained in the tumble down the ravine had prevented Wu from seeking shelter or maintaining the physical activity necessary to generate body heat. Medical examiners noted that rescuers noted that her injuries and exposure significantly reduced the chances of survival. Given the severity of her situation and the extreme weather conditions, Wu's death sent shockwaves through Taiwan's hiking community and her substantial social media following. Her final Facebook post, showing that serene view above the clouds, became a memorial where over 1,000 people left messages of condolence and remembrance. Many described her as an inspiration who had encouraged them to explore Taiwan's natural beauty, while others reflected on the fine line between adventure and tragedy that defines extreme outdoor pursuits. The media response to Wu's death proved controversial and deeply troubling to those who knew her story. Despite the fact that she had been wearing proper hiking gear when she died, and that her bikini photos were only taken briefly at summits for social media, numerous outlets focused obsessively on her nickname rather than the circumstances of her death. Headlines suggested she had died because of inappropriate clothing choices, completely misrepresenting the reality of what had happened. Publications ran multiple photos of Wu in bikinis, alongside stories about her death, with condescending captions about the risks of climbing in inappropriate gear. The coverage sparked outrage among her supporters and the hiking community, who pointed out that Wu was an experienced mountaineer who always used proper safety equipment and clothing during her climbs. The bikini photos were simply a social media tradition, not representative of how she actually conducted her serious mountaineering expeditions. Wu's mother, Suran, felt particularly hurt by the harsh comments and criticism that followed her daughter's death. Some of the negative remarks even came from family members, with relatives questioning whether she should have done more to discourage her daughter's risky hobbies. The grief-stricken mother had been at a Buddhist temple in Taipei seeking solace when police arrived at her home to inform her of Gigi's disappearance. Only learning of her daughter's death from a friend after leaving the temple. A few days after Wu's death, she was cremated in New Taipei City in a ceremony attended by approximately 300 people. Messages of love and support filled a memorial book, while Yang showed a video that celebrated his friend's journey from a carefree girl playing in rivers to a highly respected figure in the mountaineering community. The service provided closure for those who had known and admired Wu, offering a chance to remember her achievements rather than focus on the circumstances of her death. The incident highlighted ongoing debates about solo hiking in Taiwan's most challenging terrain, particularly during winter months when weather conditions can change rapidly and rescue operations become exponentially more difficult. An ex-government official noted that Wu was one of 8 people who lost their lives in the mountains that year, with many of these adventurers having changed their planned routes and ventured into high-risk or off-route terrain to circumvent strict regulations, making rescue operations more difficult. In response to Wu's death and similar incidents, the government proposed improving education about mountaineering and wilderness survival. Officials also began drafting legislative changes to make hazard signs mandatory in high-risk mountain areas, while considering measures that would reduce government liability for accidents involving hikers who ventured into restricted areas without proper permits. Friends and fellow hikers remembered Wu as someone who genuinely loved sharing Taiwan's natural beauty with others. Her enthusiasm for the mountains was infectious, and she had inspired countless people to explore the outdoors. Unlike many social media influencers, Wu had turned down offers from hiking gear companies and refused to partner with mountain travel companies, choosing to remain independent despite her dwindling savings. In the weeks following her death, activity on Wu's social media accounts gradually ceased, removing another digital space where followers had gathered to share memories and condolences. The loss of these platforms meant that much of her mountaineering legacy existed only in the memories of those who had followed her adventures and been inspired by her fearless approach to exploring Taiwan's wilderness areas. The tragedy of her death was compounded by the way some media outlets chose to sensationalize her story rather than honor her memory as an accomplished mountaineer who simply had the misfortune of falling in dangerous conditions. Her legacy should have been defined by her genuine love for Taiwan's mountains, her environmental consciousness in cleaning up trails, and her willingness to help other hikers in need. In the end, Gigi Wu's story serves as a sobering reminder that even the most experienced outdoor enthusiasts remain vulnerable to the unpredictable forces of nature, and that the mountains she loved so deeply could claim her life as easily as they had provided her with joy and purpose throughout her climbing career. Her death was not the result of reckless behavior or inappropriate clothing, but rather a tragic accident that could have befallen any solo hiker in those treacherous winter conditions. It was July 22, 2016, at a residential complex in Tampa, Florida, where evening humidity hung thick and temperatures remained in the mid-80s despite the late hour. The facility featured a large community pool with a retractable fiberglass cover system. The pool had been partially drained for maintenance, exposing several feet of concrete walls above the waterline. Harlan West, a 34-year-old night maintenance worker, was completing his final rounds before scheduled repairs. He was known for his professionalism in ensuring recreational facilities remained safe and functional. Noah Briggs, a 29-year-old resident of the complex, had been involved in an escalating dispute with West over noise complaints. West lived in an adjacent unit and had filed multiple complaints with the Homeowners Association about late-night gatherings at Briggs's apartment that violated community quiet hours. These complaints had resulted in fines totaling over $1,500 for Briggs and a formal warning that further violations could result in lease termination. Text messages recovered later from Briggs's phone contained hostile references to West and statements about teaching him a lesson for ruining his life over nothing. Briggs had become increasingly agitated about the financial burden of the fines and what he perceived as West's excessive interference in his personal activities. The pool cover system consisted of motorized tracks and a large fiberglass panel that could be extended across the water surface. That evening, West was conducting his standard closing inspection of the pool area. A resident operating a recreational drone captured footage during West's inspection, recording him walking along the pool's edge, examining the cover mechanism. Briggs had accessed the pool equipment area earlier that day and loosened several critical anchor bolts beneath the fiberglass cover. These bolts were essential structural components that distributed the cover's weight across the support framework. Briggs later claimed he intended only to create a malfunction that would reflect poorly on West's maintenance work and potentially get him reprimanded by management. As West stepped onto the pool deck adjacent to the cover's track to complete his inspection, the compromised support system experienced progressive anchor bolt failure. The fiberglass panel, carrying a distributed load of several hundred pounds across its support framework, collapsed without warning. West fell 9 feet onto the exposed concrete bottom of the partially drained pool, striking the hard surface with significant force. The collapsing cover material fell on top of him, creating additional impact trauma. The drone footage captured the sudden structural failure and West's fall, though the angle prevented clear visibility of the final impact. Multiple fractures to his skull and spine occurred upon contact with the concrete surface, and movement ceased within seconds of the collapse. The resident operating the drone immediately contacted emergency services after witnessing the accident. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, but found West unresponsive beneath the collapsed cover material. He was pronounced dead at the scene from traumatic injuries, consistent with a high-impact fall onto concrete. Investigators examining the pool cover system discovered tool marks on the loosened anchor bolts that matched equipment found in Briggs's apartment. The drone footage provided clear evidence of the structural failure sequence, and engineering analysis confirmed that the cover would not have collapsed without the deliberate tampering. Text message records and witness statements about the ongoing dispute established Briggs's motive. Briggs initially denied involvement, but later admitted to loosening the bolts, claiming he intended only to create a mechanical failure that would embarrass West professionally. Structural engineers determined that loosening the anchor bolts caused uneven load redistribution, resulting in progressive shear failure across the remaining supports, making catastrophic collapse inevitable under normal operating conditions. Briggs was charged with manslaughter under Florida law. Following his conviction, he was sentenced to 12 years in state prison. The case prompted new inspection requirements for pool cover systems and stricter penalties for tampering with shared recreational facilities in residential complexes. It was November 12, 2016, when 29-year-old Elodie Vance arrived at the Portland Community Center, excited to participate in what she believed would be a harmless charity bake-off. The cheerful bakery assistant had always been known for her generous spirit and competitive nature, traits that made her popular among co-workers at Sweet Dreams Bakery, where she decorated wedding cakes with meticulous precision. Elodie had signed up for the fundraising event to support the local food bank, never imagining that her eagerness to help others would lead to tragedy. Her bubbly personality had drawn many friends to the event, including her fellow contestant Jenna Lee, a 29-year-old marketing coordinator who shared Elodie's competitive streak. The event organizer, 45-year-old Rick Dalton, had coordinated dozens of community fundraisers over the years. His jovial demeanor made him a natural choice to oversee the cupcake eating contest. Rick had carefully reviewed safety protocols with all contestants, emphasizing the importance of chewing thoroughly and stopping if anyone experienced difficulty. Elodie had practiced at home, managing to eat 2 cupcakes in quick succession, but she had never attempted the rapid consumption required for the 3-minute challenge. Her friends often joked about her tiny throat and how she always ate more slowly than others, a characteristic that should have served as a warning. The community center buzzed with excitement as approximately 60 spectators gathered around the contest area. Rick had positioned water cups at each contestant's table and briefed volunteers on choking response procedures. The atmosphere was festive, with families cheering for their favorite participants. When the timer started, Elodie dove into the challenge with determination. The dense, heavily frosted cupcakes proved more difficult to consume quickly than she had anticipated. She managed 3 mini-sized cupcakes in under a minute, taking minimal sips of water between bites to maintain her pace against Jenna and the other contestants. At her 4th cupcake, Elodie experienced a brief coughing fit, but continued after a small sip of water. Crumbs were visible around her lips as she pushed forward, driven by her competitive nature and desire to contribute to the charity's success. Disaster struck during her 6th cupcake. As Elodie attempted to swallow a large portion quickly, a compacted food bolus became lodged at her laryngeal inlet, creating a complete upper airway obstruction. She immediately grasped her throat, unable to produce any effective cough or sound. Jenna noticed first, alerting Rick as Elodie's lips began turning dusky blue. The trained volunteer rushed over and performed back blows, followed by abdominal thrusts, and another volunteer began preparing to start CPR in case she lost consciousness. Cyanosis deepened around Elodie's mouth as her body fought desperately for oxygen. Emergency medical services arrived within minutes of Rick's 911 call. Paramedics performed laryngoscopy and used McGill forceps to extract the food bolus from her airway, but precious time had already passed. Elodie had progressed to pulseless electrical activity arrest from prolonged oxygen deprivation. CPR was initiated immediately on scene, with paramedics working frantically to restore circulation. They achieved a brief return of spontaneous circulation during transport, but the damage from extended hypoxia was already catastrophic. Her brain had been deprived of oxygen for too long. At the hospital, emergency physicians confirmed severe anoxic brain injury. Despite successful airway clearance and mechanical ventilation, she entered post-cardiac arrest syndrome, a predictable cascade of organ dysfunction caused by prolonged hypoxia. The medical team exhausted every available intervention, but Elodie's condition continued deteriorating. Later that same day, surrounded by devastated family members and friends, Elodie Vance was pronounced dead from asphyxiation caused by complete airway obstruction. The vibrant young woman who had entered the contest to help feed hungry families had become another tragic statistic. The community center immediately banned all speed-eating contests and implemented comprehensive choking response training for staff members. The charity established a scholarship in Elodie's memory, focusing on food safety education. It was February 3, 2018, when the frozen wilderness of Lake Superior would become the final resting place for one of Minnesota's most dedicated underwater photographers. Kellen Shaw, a 36-year-old professional photographer from Duluth, had spent years perfecting his craft in the unforgiving cold waters of the Great Lakes. With 920 log dives and specialized cold water certifications, Shaw was known for his breathtaking images of ice formations in frozen lake ecosystems. However, his perfectionist nature often drove him to dangerous extremes, frequently extending dive times beyond safe limits in pursuit of the perfect shot. Shaw had planned this solo ice diving expedition to photograph unique frozen formations on Lake Superior's bottom during the harsh Minnesota winter. The lake's surface was locked under 18 inches of solid ice, requiring him to chainsaw entry and exit holes through the frozen barrier. Water temperature measured a bone-chilling 34 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to kill an unprotected diver within minutes. His dive plan called for 15 minutes of bottom time at 80 feet. Shaw's dry suit had developed small leaks in the wrist seals over months of use, a critical equipment failure he noticed during pre-dive checks, but chose to ignore rather than delay his expedition. Air temperature had plummeted to minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit, with 20-knot winds creating brutal wind chill factors of minus 45 degrees. Shaw's surface support consisted of his inexperienced girlfriend, who lacked any emergency training. This violated fundamental ice diving safety protocols, requiring trained surface support personnel. Even more dangerously, Shaw failed to properly attach his safety line, the critical lifeline that would guide him back to the entry hole under solid ice. His dive computer displayed low battery warnings during final equipment checks, but Shaw's obsession with capturing perfect photographs overrode his safety judgment. He decided to proceed rather than delay for battery replacement, eliminating his primary source of depth, time, and navigation information. Shaw entered the frigid water and began his descent. At 10 minutes into the dive, his dry suit wrist seals failed completely, allowing a surge of 34-degree water to flush into the suit and trigger immediate cold shock breathing panic. The freezing water sent him into uncontrollable gasping, and in the chaos, he lost buoyancy control, sinking past his planned depth. His dive computer failed completely due to battery exhaustion, leaving him without depth, time, or navigation information in the dark underwater environment. Disorientation and numbness set in quickly as cold shock transitioned into early hypothermia, making it harder for him to use his equipment properly. Confusion clouded his judgment, while loss of fine motor control made it impossible to operate equipment properly. His regulator began free-flowing due to ice crystal formation, rapidly depleting his air supply. The safety line that should have guided Shaw back had never been properly clipped to his harness, leaving him without navigation reference under the solid ice sheet. As hypothermia advanced, his hands became completely numb, preventing him from operating his BCD inflator or emergency signaling devices. Shaw attempted to surface, but became completely disoriented under the impenetrable ice barrier. Hypothermia-induced confusion made it impossible to locate the entry hole, and he began swimming in circles beneath the frozen surface. His body temperature continued dropping to critical levels, triggering cardiac arrhythmia. At around 40 feet, Shaw finally lost consciousness as cold incapacitation and oxygen deprivation overwhelmed him. The combination of severe hypothermia and cardiac arrest proved instantly lethal. He drowned while floating motionless under the ice sheet, his body drifting 200 feet from the entry hole, while his untrained surface support waited unknowingly above. Recovery operations required specialized ice rescue teams working in extremely dangerous conditions. It took 4 grueling hours to locate Shaw's body in the dark, frigid water beneath the ice. Medical examination revealed he had died from drowning, complicated by severe hypothermia and cardiac arrest. Investigation uncovered that Shaw had violated multiple ice diving safety protocols, including solo diving without proper surface support and failure to secure his safety line. His death prompted stricter equipment inspection standards and mandatory hypothermia prevention training programs. On February 4, 2016, the Osaka Winter Invitational hosted its women's artistic gymnastics finals inside the Midori Sports Hall in Osaka, Japan. The competition brought in junior and senior athletes from several countries. The venue was a mid-sized indoor arena that seated about 5,000 spectators. The lighting was bright, the floor mats had been cleaned earlier that morning, and the temperature inside stayed around 72 degrees Fahrenheit, thanks to industrial heaters placed behind the stands. One of the athletes competing was Elena Marquez, a 17-year-old American gymnast from a small training center in Arizona. She was not one of the top names in the national program, but she had been improving quickly over the past 2 years. Elena originally trained as an all-around competitor, but her coaches believed she had the most potential on bars and vault. She was known for clean handstands and steady beam work, though her vaulting progress had been uneven. That year, her coaching team encouraged her to add a more difficult vault, a round-off entry style similar to a Yurchenko. She had landed it cleanly only a handful of times. Coaches noted that she sometimes hit the springboard too close or too far, making her block off the vault inconsistent. Even so, they believed a higher value vault would improve her chances of qualifying for summer competitions. The invitational finals were scheduled to begin at 11 a.m. Spectators filled the lower seating areas first, while teams warmed up on each apparatus. The vault runway extended across the right side of the arena, marked with tape for takeoff spacing. A safety mat required for the round-off entry was placed in front of the springboard. During the warm-up rotation, Elena began practicing her vault entries. She jogged through several approaches without flipping, working on her steps. On her 4th run, a judge sitting near the landing mat later reported that her round-off looked tight, meaning her arms didn't fully extend during her quarter turn. A teammate also mentioned afterward that Elena had been adjusting her steps more often than usual. At 11:23 a.m., the final warm-up period started. Music played softly over the speakers as athletes prepared. Elena stood at the back of the runway, waiting for the signal from her coach. The crowd was moderately loud from the other events happening at the same time. When the signal came, Elena began her run. Several spectators watching from the right side bleachers later described seeing her take her steps faster than in earlier runs. As she reached the end of the runway, her round-off was slightly off-center, causing her body to angle toward the right. Her hands hit the mat unevenly. Instead of pushing cleanly into the springboard, her right foot landed too close to the edge. Witnesses sitting behind the vault said they heard a light slipping sound as her foot skidded off the board. The slip caused her chest to dip forward as she hit the front of the vaulting table. Her forehead and shoulder made contact first. The impact stopped her momentum instantly, and she dropped straight down onto the mat below the horse. The music in the arena continued for a few seconds before staff members realized what had happened. A coach standing near the uneven bars waved his arms, and the judges signaled to halt warm-ups. 2 staff members ran to Elena while several gymnasts stepped back from the runway. Elena lay motionless on the mat, Her legs had folded beneath her, and her arms were angled awkwardly near her sides. The medical team reached her within moments. Team personnel pulled a curtain divider across the front portion of the mat to block the view, while responders worked. Announcements were made in Japanese and English, instructing the audience to remain in their seats. The other events in the arena were paused. A stretcher was brought to the vault area. Several coaches and athletes stood at a distance, talking quietly among themselves. The warm-up timers were shut off, and judges gathered near their table with clipboards in hand, waiting for direction from the event officials. After some time, organizers announced that vault warm-ups were canceled and that further information would be given once the situation was evaluated. Spectators began to shift in their seats, and the arena noise dropped to a low murmur. Later that afternoon, officials released a statement confirming that Elena Marquez had suffered fatal neck and spinal injuries from the vaulting impact. The nature of the trauma, a catastrophic axial loading to the cervical spine, left no room for hope. The vault finals were immediately removed from the schedule. The remaining apparatus events proceeded, but the celebratory air of the Invitational was gone, replaced by a pall of tragedy. The Midori Sports Hall added additional runway padding for future competitions, and the event committee revised its warm-up procedures the following season. It was May 21, 2017, when 34-year-old Hollis King laced up his running shoes for what would become his final race. The ambitious insurance adjuster from Tulsa had spent months preparing for his first marathon. Driven by a desire to prove that middle-aged office workers could achieve athletic greatness, his methodical approach to training mirrored his professional attention to detail, but nothing could have prepared him for the brutal conditions that awaited. Hollis worked long hours investigating claims and had recently gone through a difficult divorce. Running became his escape, channeling his frustration into something positive. His dedication impressed his running partner, Derek Shaw, a 41-year-old construction foreman who had completed several marathons. Derek's supportive nature pushed Hollis to set an ambitious goal of finishing under 4 hours. The weather forecast should have been a warning. Meteorologists predicted temperatures reaching 92 degrees Fahrenheit with bright sunshine. For an inexperienced marathoner who had trained primarily in cooler spring weather, these conditions represented a dangerous challenge that Hollis underestimated. Race volunteer Tina Brooks, a 38-year-old elementary school teacher, positioned herself at the halfway point with water cups and ice packs, though the race lacked proper cooling equipment like cold water immersion tubs. The race began at dawn, with over 800 participants. Hollis felt confident as he and Derek settled into their planned 9-minute-per-mile pace. The early miles passed smoothly, with Hollis maintaining good form and staying hydrated. His training had prepared him for the distance, but not for the rising heat. By mile 10, temperatures soared past 85 degrees. Hollis began sweating heavily, his shirt completely soaked. He poured water over his head at each station, but the relief was temporary. Derek noticed his friend's increasingly labored breathing, but assumed it was normal marathon fatigue. The turning point came around mile 15. Hollis's pace began to slow noticeably, and his usual steady gait became choppy. His face flushed bright red, and sweat poured from every pore. Derek encouraged him to walk through the next aid station, but Hollis insisted on maintaining his target pace. At mile 18, warning signs became unmistakable. Hollis stumbled slightly, his coordination clearly compromised. When Derek spoke to him, his responses were slurred and confused. His skin felt burning hot to the touch, indicating his body's cooling system was failing catastrophically. The final miles became a nightmare. Hollis's mental state deteriorated rapidly as his core body temperature soared past 104 degrees, likely climbing into the 106 to 108 degrees Fahrenheit range, typical of severe exertional heat stroke. At mile 22, he became disoriented about his location. Derek slowed their pace dramatically and sought help, but Hollis refused to stop. Disaster struck at mile 24. Hollis suddenly collapsed onto the hot asphalt, his body convulsing in seizure-like activity. His breathing became shallow and rapid, while his skin turned dangerously hot and dry. The classic signs of exertional heat stroke were unmistakable to the medical volunteers who rushed to his aid. Tina immediately began cooling efforts, applying ice packs to his groin, armpits, and neck while creating shade. However, the race lacked proper cooling equipment and their efforts proved inadequate for such severe hyperthermia. Emergency medical services arrived quickly, but faced the same limitations. Paramedics started intravenous fluids and oxygen while continuing cooling measures during transport. Despite their best efforts, Hollis's core temperature remained dangerously elevated. The damage to his organs had already begun, with his kidneys, liver, and blood clotting systems starting to fail. At the hospital, emergency physicians worked frantically to save his life. Blood tests revealed rhabdomyolysis, acute kidney injury, and coagulopathy, all consistent with severe exertional heat stroke. Aggressive cooling protocols were implemented, but the multi-organ damage had progressed too far. Later that evening, surrounded by his devastated family, Hollis King was pronounced dead from exertional heat stroke and its complications. The man who had sought to prove his physical capabilities had instead become a victim of his own determination. The tragedy prompted immediate changes to the marathon safety protocols. Race organizers added cold water immersion tubs and implemented stricter heat illness monitoring. It was June 8, 2015, when the unforgiving depths of the Gulf of Mexico would witness one of the most horrific industrial diving accidents in recent history. Rhodes Carter, a 41-year-old commercial saturation diver from Louisiana, had spent 18 years working the dangerous waters around offshore oil platforms. With over 2,000 commercial dives under his belt, Carter was considered a veteran in the high-stakes world of underwater welding and repairs. Yet beneath his calm, methodical exterior lay a troubling habit, an increasing tendency to cut corners on safety procedures to complete jobs faster and earn performance bonuses. Carter was 3 weeks into a grueling 28-day saturation diving contract, living in a pressurized habitat maintained at 7.2 atmospheres while performing critical structural welding repairs 220 feet below the surface. The saturation diving system allowed him to work at depth for extended periods without lengthy decompression, but it also meant living in a pressurized environment that could become a death trap if anything went wrong. For 3 days, the saturation system had been experiencing intermittent seal problems, requiring manual adjustments during chamber transfers. The transfer trunk door seals showed visible signs of corrosion and irregular seating during daily inspections. These warning signs should have triggered immediate maintenance protocols, but production pressures and Carter's impatience with safety procedures led to these critical issues being overlooked. Weather conditions had been challenging, with 25-knot winds creating 8-foot seas that delayed operations. Carter had been complaining about persistent headaches and joint pain, early symptoms that could indicate decompression sickness, but he attributed these to normal effects of extended saturation diving rather than seeking medical evaluation. The rig's diving supervisor had noticed Carter's increasingly cavalier attitude toward safety protocols, observing him rushing through pre-transfer checklists designed to prevent exactly the kind of catastrophic failure that was about to occur. During what should have been a routine transfer from the living chamber to the diving bell, the corroded transfer trunk door clamp mechanism reached its breaking point. Carter was positioned at the critical transition point, surrounded by 7.2 atmospheres of pressure when the weakened door seal gave way completely. The explosive decompression was instantaneous and devastating. In a fraction of a second, Carter's body was hit with a catastrophic pressure drop from 7.2 atmospheres to surface pressure, a violent decompression no human could survive. The explosive expansion of gases inside his body caused catastrophic internal barotrauma as his lungs ruptured and arterial gas embolisms surged instantly through his bloodstream. The explosive force launched Carter's body against the steel chamber walls with tremendous impact, causing massive blunt force trauma. His lungs ruptured from rapid gas expansion, sending arterial gas embolisms racing through his bloodstream to block vital circulation to his brain and heart. His eardrums burst from the pressure differential, and his sinuses hemorrhaged extensively. The decompression shock damaged internal systems and left the chamber's communications inoperable, cutting off any chance of immediate assistance. Within seconds, the arterial gas embolisms reached his brain and heart, causing immediate loss of consciousness and cardiac arrest. Recovery teams found Carter's body showing unmistakable signs of explosive decompression, massive internal trauma combined with characteristic injuries of severe barotrauma. Investigation revealed a shocking pattern of neglected maintenance, with transfer trunk seals having gone without proper servicing for over 6 months in direct violation of federal safety regulations. The oil company faced $4.7 million in OSHA fines and was mandated to replace all saturation equipment across its fleet. Carter's death led to sweeping changes in federal regulations, requiring daily seal inspections and mandatory backup safety systems. His family received a $3.2 million wrongful death settlement. It was April 3, 2025. The Wharton County Youth Fair in Wharton, Texas, was hosting its annual PRCA-sanctioned Extreme Bulls competition. The evening air carried the familiar sounds of a professional rodeo, the announcer's voice echoing across the arena, the shuffle of boots on metal chutes, and the low rumble of bulls in the holding pens. Among the competitors preparing for the second round was Dylan Grant, a 24-year-old professional bull rider from Wyoming whose life would end in the next few minutes. Dylan had arrived at the fairgrounds earlier that day with the quiet confidence of someone who had been doing this for years. Standing about 5 feet 8 inches tall with the compact muscular build typical of professional bull riders, he carried himself with the easy manner of a young man comfortable in his chosen profession. His background told the story of dedication and steady progress through the ranks of professional rodeo born in Laramie, Wyoming. He had grown up in Jackson, where the rugged landscape and cowboy culture shaped his early years. The path that brought Dylan to Wharton began in 2018, when he obtained his PRCA permit at age 17. By February 2024, he had earned enough to purchase his full PRCA card, marking his transition from amateur to professional status. His resume included a significant achievement from 2021 when he won the bull riding title at the Mountain State Circuit Finals Rodeo while competing for the University of Wyoming Rodeo team. After graduating in 2023 with a degree in physical education teacher education, Dylan had committed fully to his professional riding career. Those who knew Dylan described him as possessing the dual qualities essential for bull riding success: physical toughness and genuine kindness. His father, Wade, would later tell reporters that his son was double tough but filled with kindness, a combination that made him respected among his peers. The professional bull rider's CEO would remember him as blessed with athletic ability, but known more for his compassion and big heart. These weren't empty platitudes spoken after tragedy struck. They reflected the consistent impression Dylan made throughout his career. The financial reality of professional bull riding meant that Dylan, like most riders, traveled from event to event, accumulating prize money and points toward championship standings. His PRCA profile showed career earnings of over $15,000, with additional money earned in the current season. For a 24-year-old building his professional reputation, these numbers represented steady progress in an extremely competitive field. The Wharton County Youth Fair represented exactly the kind of event where young professionals like Dylan could advance their careers. PRCA-sanctioned competitions offered legitimate prize money and points toward national standings, while the Extreme Bulls format focused specifically on the most challenging aspects of the sport. The bulls selected for these events were chosen for their bucking ability and unpredictability, creating the high-stakes environment that separated amateur riders from professionals. Dylan's family had supported his rodeo career from the beginning. His father, Wade, understood the risks inherent in bull riding, but recognized his son's passion and talent. His mother, Tiffany, and brother, Derek, formed the close family unit that provided emotional support for the demanding lifestyle of a traveling professional athlete. The Grant family represented the backbone of support that enables young people to pursue dangerous but meaningful careers in professional sports. The arena setup at Wharton followed standard PRCA protocols for bull riding events. Medical personnel were positioned with direct access to the competition area, and an ambulance was staged within the facility for immediate response to injuries. The presence of qualified medical staff and rapid transport capability represented the sport's evolution toward better safety practices, though the fundamental dangers of bull riding remained unchanged. As the second round began, Dylan prepared for his ride with the methodical routine he had developed over years of competition. The process of getting ready involved checking equipment, reviewing the characteristics of his assigned bull, and mentally preparing for the 8-second ride that would determine his score. Fellow competitors and event staff noted nothing unusual about Dylan's demeanor or preparation. He appeared focused and confident as he approached the chutes. The bull Dylan drew for his second-round ride was part of the carefully selected stock that made Extreme Bulls events particularly challenging. These animals were chosen for their ability to buck off even experienced riders, creating the spectacular and dangerous competition that defined professional bull riding. The specific bull's bucking pattern and temperament were factors Dylan would have studied, though the unpredictable nature of these animals meant that preparation could only go so far. When Dylan climbed onto the chute rails and positioned himself above the bull, he was following a routine he had performed hundreds of times. The process of wrapping the bull rope around his riding hand, adjusting his position, and signaling his readiness represented the culmination of years of training and experience. Event officials confirmed that all safety protocols were in place and that medical personnel were ready to respond if needed. The gate opened, and Dylan's final ride began. For the first several seconds, he maintained his position on the bull's back as the animal executed the violent bucking and spinning motions designed to dislodge any rider. Spectators and judges watched what appeared to be a competitive ride developing, with Dylan demonstrating the balance and technique that had carried him through his professional career. At approximately 5 to 6 seconds into the 8-second ride, Dylan lost his grip and was thrown from the bull's back. The dismount itself was not unusual. Even the best riders are bucked off regularly, and the protective equipment and arena design are intended to minimize injury from falls. Dylan hit the arena dirt hard, but initially appeared to be following the standard protocol for a bucked-off rider. What happened next transformed a routine buck-off into a fatal accident. The bull, still in an aggressive state after completing its bucking sequence, located Dylan on the ground and stepped directly onto him. According to Dylan's father, Wade, who provided the most specific public account of the injury mechanism, the bull's hoof struck Dylan's neck area. The impact occurred with the full weight of an animal weighing nearly 2,000 pounds, creating forces that human anatomy cannot withstand. The step lasted only seconds, but the damage was immediate and catastrophic. Dylan's neck and upper spine absorbed the crushing force of the bull's hoof, causing injuries that would prove fatal. Despite the rapid medical response that followed, the arena's medical team, positioned for exactly this type of emergency, moved toward Dylan within seconds of the impact. Dylan remained conscious immediately after the injury, though he was unable to move normally or speak clearly. The medical personnel who reached him first found him alert but showing obvious signs of severe trauma. Their initial assessment revealed the critical nature of his injuries, and they immediately began stabilization procedures designed to prevent further damage during transport. As soon as medics recognized the severity of his injuries, they initiated a trauma alert and requested an air medical unit, which typically takes 10 to 15 minutes to reach rural Texas fairgrounds. The decision to transport Dylan by helicopter rather than ground ambulance reflected the severity of his condition and the distance to the nearest trauma center capable of handling such injuries. Memorial Hermann Texas Medical Center in Houston, approximately 60 miles from Wharton, represented the best available option for the specialized care Dylan needed. During the helicopter flight, medical personnel continued their efforts to stabilize Dylan's condition. The flight time of approximately 20 to 25 minutes provided a window for advanced life support measures, though the extent of his injuries limited the effectiveness of pre-hospital interventions. The trauma team at Memorial Hermann was alerted to prepare for a critical patient with severe neck and spinal injuries. Upon arrival at the hospital, Dylan was immediately taken to the trauma bay, where surgeons and specialists began their assessment. Advanced imaging revealed the full extent of the damage to his cervical spine and associated structures. Despite the rapid response and the availability of sophisticated medical technology, the injuries proved beyond the ability of modern medicine to repair. The medical team at Memorial Hermann worked for several hours, attempting to stabilize Dylan's condition and address the multiple injuries caused by the bull's step. However, the damage to critical structures in his neck and upper spine was too extensive to overcome. The combination of spinal cord injury, vascular damage, and associated trauma created a medical situation that could not be reversed. Dylan Grant died at Memorial Hermann Texas Medical Center from the injuries he sustained when the bull stepped on his neck during the Wharton County Youth Fair competition. The official cause of death was related to the traumatic injuries to his cervical spine and associated structures, though specific medical details were not released publicly out of respect for the family's privacy. The news of Dylan's death spread quickly through the tight-knit rodeo community. The Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association issued a formal statement expressing condolences to the Grant family and acknowledging the loss to the sport. The University of Wyoming, where Dylan had competed and graduated, released its own statement mourning the death of a former student-athlete who had represented the school with distinction. Wade Grant, Dylan's father, spoke to media outlets about the accident and his son's life. His description of the injury mechanism provided the most specific public account of what had occurred in the arena. Wade's composure in discussing the tragedy reflected both his understanding of the risks inherent in his son's chosen profession and his pride in Dylan's accomplishments and character. The broader rodeo community responded with an outpouring of support for the Grant family. Fellow competitors, event organizers, and fans shared memories of Dylan and expressed their grief at the loss of such a young and promising rider. The Professional Bull Riders Organization, through its chief executive officer, issued a tribute recognizing both Dylan's athletic achievements and his reputation as a person of character and kindness. The Wharton County Youth Fair, where the tragedy occurred, also issued a statement expressing condolences to Dylan's family and acknowledging the impact of the accident on everyone present. The fair's organizers emphasized their commitment to safety while recognizing that some risks in bull riding cannot be eliminated entirely. Dylan's death highlighted the ongoing dangers faced by professional bull riders despite improvements in safety equipment and medical protocols. Modern protective vests, helmets, and other gear have reduced many types of injuries, but the fundamental risk of catastrophic trauma from contact with a 2,000-pound animal remains an inherent part of the sport. The accident also demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of current emergency response procedures in professional rodeo. The rapid response by on-site medical personnel, the immediate transport to a trauma center, and the availability of helicopter evacuation all functioned as designed. However, even with optimal medical care, some injuries prove fatal regardless of the speed and quality of the response. For Dylan's family, the tragedy represented the loss of a son, brother, and friend whose life had been dedicated to pursuing excellence in an extremely demanding sport. The grief expressed by Wade, Tiffany, and Derek Grant reflected not only their personal loss, but also their understanding that Dylan had died doing what he loved and had chosen to do despite knowing the risks involved. The University of Wyoming's tribute to Dylan emphasized his academic achievements alongside his athletic success. His degree in physical education teacher education suggested plans for a career that would have allowed him to share his knowledge and passion for athletics with future generations. The combination of his educational background and rodeo experience would have made him an ideal mentor for young people interested in Western sports. Dylan's career earnings of over $15,000, while modest by the standards of major professional sports, represented a significant achievement in the specialized world of professional bull riding. These earnings reflected not just prize money, but also the respect of his peers and the recognition of his skill by event organizers and stock contractors throughout the professional rodeo circuit. The timing of Dylan's death, occurring during what should have been the prime years of his professional career, added to the tragedy. At 24, he had reached the level of skill and experience that typically marks the beginning of a rider's most successful period. His recent purchase of a full PRCA card indicated his commitment to competing at the highest levels of the sport. The specific circumstances of Dylan's death, being stepped on by a bull after a seemingly routine buck-off, illustrated the unpredictable nature of the dangers faced by bull riders. While much attention in rodeo safety focuses on the initial contact between rider and bull, this accident demonstrated that the period immediately after a ride can be equally dangerous. The response of the rodeo community to Dylan's death reflected the close relationships that develop among people who share the risks and rewards of professional competition. The statements from various organizations and individuals consistently emphasized both Dylan's athletic ability and his character. suggesting that he had made a positive impression on everyone who knew him. Dylan Grant's story ended at Memorial Hermann Texas Medical Center in Houston, where the injuries sustained in 8 seconds of bull riding proved fatal, despite the best efforts of medical professionals. His death served as a reminder of the ultimate price that some athletes pay in pursuit of excellence in the world's most dangerous sports. The legacy Dylan left behind included not only his competitive achievements, but also the example he set as a young man who pursued his dreams with dedication while maintaining the values of kindness and integrity that defined his character. His story became part of the ongoing narrative of professional bull riding, where courage and tragedy often intersect in ways that honor both the sport and those who choose to compete in it. The evening that began with the promise of competition and the pursuit of championship points ended with a community in mourning and a family forever changed. The arena lights that had illuminated Dylan's final ride would continue to shine on future competitions, but they would never again light the path for a young cowboy whose journey ended far too soon. In the weeks that followed, memorial services would celebrate a life cut short, while the rodeo circuit would continue its relentless schedule, carrying with it the memory of Dylan Grant and the sobering reminder that in bull riding, every ride could be the last. It was November the 19th, 2017, along a commercial fishing pier on the Oregon coast, where early morning fog hung low over the water, and wind gusts were already reaching 30 miles per hour. The weathered wooden structure extended 200 feet into the harbor, lined with mooring cleats and electrical hookups for the small charter boats that operated from the facility. Storm warnings had been issued for later that day, with conditions expected to deteriorate rapidly as a Pacific front moved inland. Orion Cade, a 42-year-old charter boat captain, had arrived before dawn to prepare his vessel for what would likely be the last fishing trip before the weather turned dangerous. He operated on narrow profit margins, making every available day on the water crucial for his livelihood. Cade was known for his meticulous preparation and conservative approach to safety, traits that had kept him incident-free during 15 years of coastal fishing operations. Cade had recently ended a tumultuous 3-year relationship with Evan Pike, a dock worker in his mid-30s who also kept a small sailboat at the harbor. The breakup had been contentious, with disputes over shared property and accusations of infidelity. Pike had been ordered by the court to stay at least 100 yards away from Cade, following incidents of harassment and threatening phone calls. Pike had violated the restraining order multiple times, showing up at locations where Cade was known to dock and leaving hostile messages on his boat. Text messages recovered later from Pike's phone contained threats about making Cade regret the breakup and references to ensuring he understood the consequences of his actions. That morning, Cade was working alone on his 24-foot fishing boat, preparing nets and checking equipment while the vessel remained tied to the pier. The boat's engine was idling in preparation for departure, with the propeller intermittently engaged as wind and line tension affected the drivetrain. Security cameras mounted on nearby light poles captured Pike moving along the pier structure approximately 30 minutes before the incident occurred. Pike used a utility knife to cut through a secondary tension line that helped stabilize boats during high wind conditions. As the severed line released tension, the boat yawed sharply in the strengthening wind. The sudden lateral movement caused Cade to lose his footing on the wet deck. He stumbled toward the stern as the vessel lurched, unable to regain balance as the hull shifted beneath him. Cade fell overboard near the stern while the engine remained engaged at idle. His legs struck the rotating propeller as he entered the water, causing catastrophic lower limb trauma. Blood spread rapidly across the surface as he was forced briefly against the hull before slipping beneath the water. The boat continued to move erratically in the wind until the engine eventually stalled. Harbor Patrol responded to reports of an unmanned vessel drifting near the pier. Rescue divers recovered Cade's body 22 minutes after the initial emergency call, but he had already succumbed to blood loss and trauma from the propeller strike. The medical examiner determined that the combination of severe laceration and cold water exposure had caused rapid incapacitation. Investigators found the severed tension line and matched tool marks to equipment in Pike's possession. Security footage showed him in the area during the time frame when the sabotage occurred, clearly violating his restraining order. Pike initially denied involvement, but later admitted to cutting the line, claiming he only intended to inconvenience Cade. Phone records and witness statements contradicted Pike's claim. Harbor workers reported seeing Pike watching Cade's morning routine from a distance on previous days. Digital forensics revealed Pike had researched the pier's security camera blind spots in the weeks prior to the incident. Prosecutors argued that Pike's harassment and premeditated actions demonstrated reckless disregard for human life. Pike was charged with second-degree murder, but after plea negotiations, he was convicted of voluntary manslaughter. The court determined that while Pike may not have specifically intended to kill Cade, he had deliberately created a dangerous situation knowing Cade would be aboard the vessel. He was sentenced to 15 years in state prison with eligibility for parole after serving 85% of his sentence. The case prompted new security measures at the harbor and stricter enforcement of restraining orders in maritime settings. On September 25, 2016, the Sundara International Circuit in southern Thailand hosted its annual Grand Prix. The track was known for its long straights and a difficult right-hand turn at turn 11, where the asphalt narrowed slightly before opening again toward the final sector. Temperatures that afternoon were in the low 90s degrees Fahrenheit, and humidity was high. The asphalt surface had been absorbing heat all day, leaving parts of the track with faint waves of rising air. The grandstands were full. More than 45,000 spectators packed the main straight seating area, with another several thousand spread across hillside sections overlooking the last sector. The event drew riders from multiple international teams, including veterans and young riders hoping for a chance at bigger contracts. One of the riders that season was Lorenzo Vitali, a 27-year-old Italian racer on the Rovento Pacific team. He wasn't one of the top names in the sport. He had spent most of his career in Europe's intermediate championships before joining the team as a second-seat rider. His results for the year were steady but not remarkable. Regular mid-pack finishes, a few top 10 results during wet races, and one near podium earlier that season in Indonesia. Vitali grew up in Rimini and learned racing on small displacement bikes before advancing to regional mini-bike championships. He earned a reputation for clean lines and predictable riding, traits valued by teams looking for riders who could finish races reliably. The Sundara track, however, was one he had never ridden before this season. The race began at 2 p.m. The early laps were fast, with riders maintaining tight formation as they moved through the first sector. Turn 11, located after a long sweeping left, required riders to shift weight quickly to the right side of the bike while braking lightly. Many had commented during practice that the corner demanded firm control due to patchy grip areas on the entry. By lap 2, the lead pack was already separating from the midfield. Vitali held fourth place after a strong start. Behind him were several experienced riders, including a Japanese competitor riding for a satellite team and another Italian rider with one career win. As the riders approached turn 10, spectators near the hill section noticed a small wiggle in the rear of Vitali's bike. It wasn't dramatic, but a few fans later said it looked like the rear tire momentarily lost grip when he accelerated out of the corner. At racing speeds, small movements could be signs of nothing, or signals that a bike was lightly stepping out of line. The group entered the short straight, leading to turn 11. Speeds reached over 100 miles per hour. As riders leaned into the corner, Vitali's bike suddenly shifted. Eyewitnesses in the grandstand later described seeing the rear tire slide slightly toward the outside. For a moment, it looked like a routine loss of traction that most riders corrected through countersteering and throttle control. But as the bike slid toward the edge of the racing line, the tires suddenly caught grip again. The traction return caused the motorcycle to snap upright and veer sharply across the track. With his body shifted to the right for the lean, Vitali was pulled toward the inside as the bike changed direction. Several people watching from the big screen in the fence said they saw his right shoulder dip downward as he hung off the side of the bike, unable to recover his balance. Two riders behind him had no time to avoid him. One hit the back of Vitali's bike at an angle, the second clipped his front wheel. Both impacts happened almost simultaneously. Vitali's helmet struck the asphalt as he was pushed sideways, still partly attached to the low side of the motorcycle. His bike skidded several yards before spinning into the runoff area. Flags went up immediately, and race control red flagged the event. Track workers ran toward the crash zone, and the medical team was dispatched from the pit lane. Spectators in multiple sections stood up, some pointing toward the far right portion of the track, where the group of bikes came to rest. Vitali did not show any signs of movement after the second impact. Workers surrounded him as medical staff reached the scene. The other two riders were also attended to, though both were seen upright shortly afterward. The race did not restart. More than 20 minutes passed before an announcement was made over the loudspeakers stating that the event had officially ended for the day. A second announcement followed, informing the audience that a rider had suffered severe injuries. Later, officials confirmed that Lorenzo Vitali died from severe head and chest trauma caused by the dual impact at turn 11. The first strike, when his helmet hit the asphalt, produced a rapid deceleration injury consistent with a high-speed low-side fall. The second collision, when another rider's front wheel made contact with his upper body, caused additional blunt force damage to the ribs and sternum, leading to internal bleeding that left no possibility of survival at the scene. Medical staff on site noted that the combined impacts happened within seconds, giving him no opportunity to regain control or protect himself. The team released a short statement acknowledging the nature of his injuries, and race organizers reviewed track footage and rider telemetry to document the exact sequence that led to the crash. The Sundara International Circuit added a new grip treatment to turn 11 for the next season. It was January 14, 2018, when 31-year-old Linus Beck stepped onto the frozen surface of Lake Winnebago, determined to push human endurance to its absolute limits. The rugged auto mechanic from Green Bay had built a reputation among local anglers for his stubborn refusal to leave the ice, even when temperatures plummeted to dangerous levels. After losing his job at the local GM plant, he threw himself into ice fishing with obsessive dedication. Dr. Karen Wu, a 50-year-old family physician, combined her medical expertise with a genuine love for outdoor recreation, making her the perfect person to monitor Linus during his endurance attempt. Eddie Grant, a 27-year-old mechanic, had worked alongside Linus for 3 years, developing an unshakable loyalty to his mentor and friend. The plan seemed well conceived. Linus would remain in his insulated ice shanty for 48 consecutive hours, attempting to break the unofficial local record for continuous ice fishing. Eddie had helped prepare the shelter with extra insulation, a reliable propane heater, and emergency supplies. Weather conditions presented the first warning sign. Meteorologists predicted overnight temperatures dropping to -10 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chills approaching -28 degrees. The contest began at dawn, with Dr. Wu establishing regular check-ins and Eddie maintaining radio contact every 2 hours. As night fell, trouble emerged. Linus reported that his propane heater was functioning intermittently, likely due to regulator icing and low fuel pressure inside the frigid shanty. The temperature inside his shanty began fluctuating wildly, creating condensation that gradually dampened his clothing and sleeping gear. Eddie offered to replace the heater, but Linus insisted on continuing. The situation deteriorated rapidly during the early morning hours. Condensation had soaked his gloves and pant cuffs. His spare socks became damp from meltwater that had accumulated on the shanty floor. These seemingly minor issues would prove catastrophic. By hour 28, Dr. Wu noticed alarming changes during her radio check. Linus's speech had become noticeably slurred, and his responses seemed delayed and confused. His fine motor control was clearly compromised. These were classic early signs of hypothermia. Around hour 32, Linus's body entered the dangerous spiral of severe hypothermia. His intense shivering gradually decreased, a paradoxical sign that his body's warming mechanisms were failing. Instead of recognizing this as a medical emergency, Linus interpreted the reduced shivering as an adaptation to the cold. Eddie's attempts to reach Linus by radio at hours 34 and 36 went unanswered. Growing concerned, he and Dr. Wu decided to check on their friend personally. They found the shanty's exterior covered with thick frost, indicating dangerous conditions inside. When they entered at approximately hour 37, they discovered Linus lying motionless on his cot. His clothing had frozen stiff from accumulated moisture, a result of sub-zero air inside the shanty once the heater failed, and his skin felt dangerously cold. His breathing was barely perceptible, and they could not detect a pulse. Eddie and Dr. Wu immediately began emergency warming procedures while calling for paramedic assistance. They moved Linus to Eddie's heated truck, but his core body temperature was later measured at the medical center at approximately 79 degrees Fahrenheit. Emergency medical services arrived within 20 minutes, but the damage was irreversible. Paramedics confirmed severe hypothermia and initiated advanced cardiac life support protocols. Despite prolonged resuscitation efforts, Linus remained in a systole. At the medical center, the emergency team continued warming procedures and cardiac resuscitation for over an hour. Despite every available medical intervention, Linus Beck was pronounced dead from severe hypothermia and cardiac arrest. The tragedy prompted immediate changes to ice fishing contest regulations. Organizers implemented mandatory buddy systems, continuous heater monitoring, and temperature limits that would automatically end competitions. It was November 14, 2018, when the skeletal remains of the USS Oriskany would claim another victim in the treacherous waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Tatum Wells, a 31-year-old dive shop owner from Mobile, Alabama, had built her reputation on pushing boundaries and exploring the most challenging underwater environments. With 650 log dives and advanced wreck diving certifications, Wells possessed an adventurous spirit that often bordered on recklessness, driving her to venture into restricted areas that more cautious divers avoided. Wells had organized this charter expedition to the famous aircraft carrier wreck to capture promotional photographs for her struggling dive shop. The USS Oriskany, sitting upright in 145 feet of water, offered spectacular diving opportunities, but also presented serious hazards for those who dared to penetrate its interior spaces. Recent storms had dramatically altered the wreck's condition, shifting massive amounts of debris and creating new entanglement hazards throughout the ship's corridors. Abandoned fishing nets and cables now draped across multiple entry points, creating a deadly maze of entanglement risks. Wells saw these obstacles as minor inconveniences rather than serious threats to her safety. Her dive plan called for deep penetration into the ship's hangar deck using only a single aluminum tank, a violation of standard wreck diving protocols. Even more concerning, Wells had decided to forgo the use of safety lines and carried only one cutting tool. During equipment preparation, Wells's primary dive knife became loose and eventually fell out completely, leaving her with no cutting tools for emergencies. When her dive buddy expressed concerns about penetrating unfamiliar areas without proper safety equipment, Wells dismissed these warnings with characteristic overconfidence. At 120 feet inside the hangar deck, Wells encountered the deadly consequence of the recent storms. A dense tangle of abandoned fishing nets hung unnoticed in the compartment. As Wells shifted for a better camera angle, her fin brushed the mesh, snagging her tank valve, and each attempt to pull free tightened the net around her legs and inflator hose. Wells's attempts to free herself only made the situation worse, as her struggles caused the nets to tighten around her equipment and body. The synthetic mesh scraped through her wetsuit, causing shallow cuts that immediately began leaking small clouds of blood into the water. Her frantic movements caused her to become inverted, with her head pointing downward. The entanglement pulled Wells's primary regulator from her mouth during her desperate struggle, and the twisted nets prevented her from reaching her backup regulator. Without her lost dive knife, she had no cutting tools to sever the nets. The fishing net material had also damaged her regulator hose, creating a rapid air leak that reduced her remaining air supply from 1,800 psi to 400 psi in minutes. Wells's inverted position made it impossible for her to inflate her BCD for emergency ascent, trapping her at depth as her air supply continued depleting. Her dive buddy attempted a rescue, but lacked cutting tools and became partially entangled himself, forcing him to surface for help. Alone and trapped 120 feet inside the wreck, Wells fought desperately against the nets as her air supply dwindled to nothing. The combination of blood loss, stress, and rapid gas depletion created fatal circumstances. Wells drowned after her air supply was completely exhausted, her body remaining suspended upside down in the fishing nets deep within the USS Oriskany's hangar deck. Recovery operations required specialized technical divers with cutting equipment and took 6 hours to free Wells's body from the extensive entanglement. Investigation revealed Wells had violated multiple wreck penetration protocols by entering without redundant cutting tools or safety lines. On March 6, 2018, the Ironform Training Center in Bakersfield, California, opened its strength area early for competitive lifters preparing for the spring regional powerlifting meet. The gym sat in a converted warehouse on the edge of town, with concrete floors, exposed metal beams, and a separate room lined with lifting platforms. The air inside was cool from overnight temperatures, around 57 degrees Fahrenheit, and most of the athletes wore hoodies during warm-up sets. Ironform often hosted local lifters who wanted access to heavy racks and competition-style bars. The facility kept a collection of calibrated plates, including several heavier sets locked in a storage cabinet used only for supervised training. One of the athletes training that morning was Riley Hart, a 17-year-old high school student who competed in the junior division. She was known in the area for her steady progress in squat and deadlift. Riley had earned a few medals at county meets and had placed well at the previous year's state qualifier. Her coaches believed she had the potential to enter national-level youth competitions within the next 2 seasons. Riley trained 3 afternoons a week, but on the day of the accident, she had come in early because her coach wanted to test her form with heavier loads. She had already completed warm-ups on the stationary bike and moved into mobility drills on the lifting platform. 2 other athletes were in the room, along with her coach, who stood behind the squat rack adjusting the spotter arms. The gym used a standard power rack with adjustable safety bars, but earlier that morning, another lifter had lowered the safety height for their own session. Riley and her coach planned to increase the weight gradually during the workout. The goal was not a personal record, but a controlled heavy single to prepare for the upcoming meet. At around 8:10 a.m., Riley began her squat sets using 135 pounds, then 185, then 215, all with steady form. Her coach added more plates, checking each collar to make sure it was tight. After another rest period, Riley prepared to attempt a heavier load that approached her last competition squat. Several athletes later confirmed that the weight on the bar was near the upper limit of what junior lifters usually attempt in training. Riley positioned herself under the bar, settled her shoulders, and stepped back into her stance. The gym was quiet, except for the sound of plates clinking on another platform across the room. Her coach stood close behind her, prepared to assist if she lost balance. On the descent, witnesses said her form looked stable. She reached depth, began to rise, then stalled halfway up. Her knees shifted inward slightly, and the coach moved closer to help guide the bar upward. As he reached to assist, the bar rolled a few inches across her upper back. The sudden shift caused her to tilt forward. Before either of them could adjust, Riley attempted to step forward to steady herself, but her right foot slipped on a patch of chalk near the front of the platform. The movement caused the bar to swing forward, pulling her out of position. The load exceeded what she could control in that angle. The bar fell from her shoulders faster than her coach could react. It came down across the upper part of her neck when she slipped a second time, trying to step away from the rack. The impact forced her forward onto her knees while the coach reached out, trying to lift the bar off her back. His hand caught the edge of a plate, causing a minor cut on his palm. The sound of the bar hitting the platform echoed through the room, and both nearby athletes dropped their equipment and ran toward the rack. One pulled the remaining plates off one side of the bar to reduce the weight while the coach held the opposite end to keep it from rolling. Together, they lifted the load enough to slide it away from Riley. She showed no response and remained motionless on the platform. Someone shouted toward the front desk for help, and a staff member ran to call emergency services. The athletes cleared space around her, and the coach knelt beside her while the staff member returned with a first aid kit. Emergency responders arrived shortly after. Staff directed them through the side entrance, and the gym temporarily closed the strength room while the responders worked. Later that afternoon, officials released a short statement confirming that Riley Hart had died from severe neck injuries caused by the bar impact during training. According to the report, the force of the falling bar created a high-energy compression to the upper cervical spine, fracturing multiple vertebrae and damaging the spinal cord at the level that controls breathing and motor function. Witness accounts noted that Riley had shown no movement after the impact, and medical responders stated that the injury was immediately non-survivable due to the extent of structural damage to the neck. Following the incident, the gym raised the safety bar height on all racks, installed secondary catch arms designed for heavy youth training, and introduced new rules requiring 2 spotters for any lift above a set threshold. The updated policy also mandated form checks and supervisor approval before younger athletes could attempt heavier loads. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.